Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the MMA Pick'ems podcast, where we'll be breaking down UFC Fight Night, Smith versus Spann. It's a pretty weak main event, but the rest of the card looks like it could be kind of fun. Not a ton of name value, but I'm going to stop judging these cards just based off of the matchups, because you just never know how these cards are going to turn out. But yeah, this should be a fun one. There's a number of prospects on this card. In fact, I think most of this card is just a lot of prospects. So I think this card will do okay. But before we get any further, I do want to review the previous card. And, honestly, it's not great. We're on a bit of a slump here, but for better or worse, I do want to be transparent here. So I did end up losing another 5 units on Till Brunson, that card. And so let's go ahead and run right through it. So right off the bat, we did cash on Marc-Andre Barriault. I did feel that he'd be the better striker, the one with coming forward with more volume. I also had him to win in round 3, just thinking that, with the pace he pushes and with Dalcha's penchant to kind of slow down, the third round finish was live, but it looked like Barriault was sitting on a pretty comfortable lead, didn't really need to pick up the pace too much, and Dalcha... he played it pretty safe that fight. He didn't go like balls to the wall with the takedowns or just winging crazy overhands. So I didn't slow down as much as I expected him to. But regardless, Barriault was able to cash, just didn't cash the third round prop there. And moving along, I had Jack Shore in a parlay as well. Also had Shore to win in the third round as well for this fight. Obviously, the third round didn't cash, but Shore did win pretty comfortably. I did expect Shore to go to the grappling a little bit more, which is why, I would have expected him to potentially get the finish had he had gone to the grappling. But Shore seemed pretty comfortable on the feet, and this was just a straight-up outclass. Shore didn't really need to take the fight to the ground to really win here. He was beating Sholinian pretty comfortably on the feet, so he didn't really need to go to the grappling like I expected him to. And moving along, did drop the Bukauskas fight, and just not much to say here. Just figured Bukauskas, if he would have weathered the storm early, he'd be able to win the second and third round, but he gets his face busted up and gets his foot stomped in. So what can you say there? But it didn't look like Bukauskas was going to win regardless of whether or not he got that knee injury. It definitely seemed like Bukauskas was a bit tentative and apprehensive when the fight started. Like, he might have just respected the power of Roundtree a little too much. And basically, we just saw Bukauskas back out and, just not really fight aggressively, which, sometimes I feel that fighters, they respect the power of their opponent a little too much to the point where it kind of, shifts their game plan a little bit, and they're not as comfortable in there. And when that happens, I feel they're a little more likely to either get knocked out or just underperform, because they're a little stiff, man. They're not really feeling themselves. So yeah, I think that's kind of what happened there. You do see that sometimes when fighters, they go up against a knockout artist or something, and they're a little more tentative in there. They're a little more stiff. They're not as comfortable as they usually are, and it just makes them a lot less effective than how they usually fight. Anyways, I just feel the mental part of this game is it's very big, but it's just so hard to really factor into how you break these fights down. But moving along, we did also drop a unit on Zawada. Expected it to be a little closer, expected Zawada to maybe mix in the grappling a little bit more, but he just kept it standing the whole fight. And I'd say he did get thoroughly beat by a short notice Morono, which, I don't think is a great look. It didn't really look all that competitive, considering Zawada had a full camp and everything. And the fact that it didn't go to the grappling like at all was a little disappointing. But ultimately, it was just a 1-unit shot, and not too upset with it. Just feel that it could have been a slightly closer fight had Zawada come in with a different approach. And moving along, did cash on Molly McCann. So kind of played out the way I expected it to. It was pretty close on the feet, but I think what really set McCann apart was the fact that she was moving forward. She was throwing a little bit more, and she did mix in the takedowns. She won, I think, a pretty, I don't want to say comfortable decision, but I do feel it was a pretty apparent decision for McCann. And lastly, did drop half a unit on Spivak. I just felt the line was a little wide, felt that there would have been potentially a path with the grappling of Spivak, and should he have survived that first round, the fight would probably look a lot closer. But of course, with Aspinall, that first round knockout is very live, especially with the amount of first round finishes that he's had. It's kind of unfortunate we don't really get to see more from Aspinall because, even after this performance, all it does is reinforce the fact that the guy's got, pretty heavy hands. He's dangerous in that first round, but it doesn't really answer any questions in regards to how he's going to look when he gets extended. And it's going to be really tough betting him going forward, because he's likely going to be pretty juiced, and he's still kind of unproven in the sense that we haven't really seen him extended. How his cardio is going to look in the later rounds. But as it stands, the hype train is going to continue rolling for Aspinall here. And lastly, Tills rounded out our parlay with Jack Shore. So initially I did say I felt the line was a little wide, but it closed up a bit. And then I figured Shore was pretty much a lock, so I used it to kind of soften up the odds on Till a little bit. And, when it comes to this matchup, I definitely overestimated the takedown defense of Till. I expected him to be able to keep the fight standing a little bit longer and to potentially work his way back up to the feet if he did get taken down. And yeah, so kind of overestimated Till there, and definitely underestimated Brunson. I think this is like the third time I've slept on Brunson, and have paid for it. Honestly, good on Brunson for pulling it off. The guy's been counted out in like his last 2 or 3 fights, and has been able to pull it off, and is likely in line for a title fight after the Izzy Whitaker fight. That said, though, the state of the division is not looking too good if a 38-year-old Brunson's going to be in line for a title shot, because outside of Rob, I just feel there aren't any other legit contenders. And as far as young prospects go, not really seeing anything too exciting. I think Till was potentially the last one, but now it's pretty obvious the guy needs to work on his game a little bit. But anyways, that'll do it for the recap for last week. And with that, we'll get right into this card. We do have 15 fights as it stands now. It looks like the UFC's gone a little heavy on some of these cards with the expectation that some of these fights might fall out. But, as it stands right now, we do have 15 fights. It might change between when I record this and when I release it. But, we do have a number of fights here. So without further ado, let's get right into it. And in this fight, we have Hannah Goldy versus Emily Whitmire, and Whitmire's going to be the slight favorite here at minus 120, and Goldy's going to be at plus 100. And, if I'm being honest, this is a fight I don't have very much interest in, or much conviction in for that matter. It's an extremely low level women's fight. We have Whitmire, who is she's 4-4, and overall is 2-3 in the UFC. So yeah, not a great record there. Her striking is extremely basic, honestly. She doesn't really throw much and doesn't seem to have much power either. So, it's not like she's really hurting these fighters, even though, her volume is pretty low. Her defensive grappling is extremely questionable. All 4 of her losses are via submission. That said, though, it was against pretty high-level grapplers, but, just overall not a very good look whatsoever. And for her opponent, Goldy, pretty similar situation, primarily a striker, but, not a particularly great one, if I'm being honest. Overall, I just feel that Goldy's got a pretty significant disadvantage in the striking with just how much size she's given up. She's got those tiny little T-Rex arms, and I know I mention it every single time, but, I feel it's a pretty legit weakness. Like with the amount of reach she's given up, she's going to have to get in real close to her opponents, and against like half decent strikers, they're going to take advantage of that. And Belbita kind of showed that in her most recent fight against Goldy, where she was basically just landing at will against Goldy, and Goldy really wasn't able to do much until I'd say late in the fight when she started hitting some of those takedowns. But Goldy definitely does have some of that wrestling she could go to, but I don't think she's like a super dominant wrestler or anything, and her striking is not all that great. So it's kind of hard to pick a side here, just because I feel both fighters are extremely low level, and on the feet, it could be pretty close because even though Goldy is giving up some size, it's not like Whitmire's exactly like a great striker or anything. And, Whitmire's got kind of T-Rex arms in her own right too, right? Because she's about she's an inch taller than Goldy, but only has a 2-inch reach advantage. So yeah, her arms are kind of short too. But yeah, it's gonna probably be a pretty back and forth fight. Lots of pitter patter exchanges. Yeah, man, this is a tough one to call. I think I'm gonna go with Goldy just because I think maybe she's got a little bit of wrestling upside, and I don't think that Whitmire's got the power to really make Goldy respect her. So I think that Goldy's gonna be able to do her stupid little, skirt on the outside and just land a few kicks, land a few punches, maybe work in a bit of wrestling. So yeah, I just feel that with in regards to the striking, it's probably going to be pretty even. Goldy might have a bit of the volume advantage and possible wrestling upside. So I'm just going to go with Goldy here, but extremely low level fight, extremely low confidence. I'm just going to pick the fighter I feel might be able to throw a little bit more in Goldy here. So the pick here is Goldy. Going to have her win by decision, but I would not bet this fight. Very, very low level and unpredictable. And in this matchup, we have Alateng Heili versus Gustavo Lopez. And, this fight is near evens right now. Heili Alateng being the slight favorite at minus 115. And you could get Lopez for minus 105 here. And, this is a pretty interesting fight. We have two, I'd say, fringe UFC level guys here. I'd say Heili's probably got a little bit more upside than Lopez, but I think that he's still a pretty limited fighter. Anyways, with Heili, I'd consider him a counterpuncher, although, he does have a bit of wrestling that he could go to. On the feet, he is generally pretty low volume, is somewhat hittable, but, he does have a bit of power in his hands. And, he's got decent timing with some of his shots, but on the feet, he just does not really throw all that much. And he has a tendency to just get absolutely teed off on. Yeah, outside of that, though, just not too much else to say about his striking. And like I said before, Heili is, he does have a bit of wrestling he can go back to, but he's not great there, and he's not super reliable to go there. In his fight against Benoit and Batgarel, he didn't really go to his wrestling until that third round. For most of the fight, the first two rounds, he was pretty content to strike, even though it would appear that he'd have a pretty significant advantage on in the wrestling. So, a bit of a head scratcher as to why he didn't go to that a little earlier. Basically, he could have lost both of those fights if, the judging wasn't so favorable towards him. But, he ended up winning those two close fights. But, had he had gone to his wrestling in maybe the first or the second round and then the third round as well, he, I think, could have won those fights very comfortably as opposed to, just barely winning those fights. So, yeah, I feel the guy's maybe got subpar fight IQ. But, yeah, I just don't know why he's not going to the wrestling a little bit more, especially in those fights where he had the advantage. With Alateng, like I said before, he is extremely hittable. Like his most recent fight with Casey Kenny, Kenny was basically able to just land that body kick at will for him. And, even in the fights before that against Benoit and Batgarel, I believe Alateng was getting outstruck pretty soundly. If I'm looking back at those fights, it's kind of amazing that he actually did win those two fights, but I guess that Alateng was landing some of the heavier shots, which may have influenced some of the judges. I guess the only thing that really redeems him is the fact that, he did consistently go to the wrestling in that third round and win that third round pretty soundly. And in this fight, he'll be going up against Gustavo Lopez, who, is a pretty well-rounded fighter himself. Does move pretty well on the feet, but, I'd say his striking is a little basic, a little bit reliant on landing some of those big power shots. Lopez does look like he can grapple a bit too, but haven't really seen him go to it all that much. That said, though, I don't think he's had a ton of opportunities to do so in the UFC. He's had a really weird UFC run, if I'm being honest. He came in short notice against Merab, which I don't think he had any chance in that fight. He was basically just fed to Merab as a short notice fill-in. He was able to punch his UFC ticket there, and he gets matched up with Anthony Burchak in his next fight. Burchak at this point in his career, not really UFC caliber, so Lopez was able to get to finish that fight. And then he gets matched up with Adrian Yanez, who is another, really tough fight for him. Gets finished that fight. So, these are fights where it's kind of hard to gauge how good Lopez is, because the guys he's losing to, I'd say, are like pretty legit fighters. And then the guys he's beaten are not UFC caliber. So kind of hard to get a good read on him. But just from what I've seen so far, I just don't think that Lopez is like a particularly dangerous fighter or anything on the feet. And I feel like his grappling might be a little limited. But yeah, like I said before, I feel maybe he's UFC caliber, maybe he's not. I did say he's like a fringe UFC level guy. I think these next few fights of his will really kind of paint a more clear picture, but I think the verdict is still out. But taking a look at this matchup here, it's gonna be a little tough to call here, but I do have to favor Heili a little bit more. I think that on the feet, even though Heili's not the highest volume guy, I think that he's a decent enough counterpuncher that it'll give Lopez some troubles, look when he's looking to engage. I feel that the power and I guess the speed of Heili might give Lopez a bit of trouble. And, once he starts feeling some of the power of Heili, I think that Lopez is going to be a little tentative to throw. I don't think he's going to look to want to engage too much, especially once Heili starts landing some of his shots. So I do feel that Lopez, maybe he'll throw a little more volume on the feet, but in general, I just don't think Lopez is like a volume machine or anything. So it's not like he's going to be doubling Heili up, but on the feet, I do favor Heili to be landing just the harder, more impactful shots. And then, if Heili does decide to go to the wrestling, I guess it's there also. I don't think Lopez has got terrible defensive grappling or anything, but, if Alateng decides to go there a little later in the fight, he could definitely secure that third round. But, on the feet, I do feel that Alateng is going to be landing some of the heavier shots, and he might even get the knockout. Lopez did get finished in his last fight, got caught by a nasty counter by Yanez, but obviously Heili Alateng not on the level of Yanez there. But, I do feel he's got the power to potentially knock Lopez out if he connects. So the pick here for me is going to be Heili Alateng, and I do actually have a 1-unit bet placed on him. I feel that Alateng is going to be live for the knockout, but I do feel he's probably going to be landing some of the bigger shots, having, the bigger moments in the fight, and then obviously the grappling to go to later in the fight. So, yeah, I'm not saying Gustavo Lopez can't win here, but I think his path to victory really is to either catch Heili Alateng, which I don't think is going to happen. Alateng's shown pretty good toughness. He took a hell of a beating against Casey Kenny, and I guess the other path for Lopez is maybe if he's able to just double up the volume on Alateng, he can kind of run away with the decision, but I just don't really see that either. I don't think Lopez is a volume striker, and if he starts to open up too much with the striking, I do think Heili Alateng can catch him. So the pick for me is Alateng, and I'll take him to win by knockout. And in the next fight, we have Impa Kasanganay versus Carlston Harris. And Kasanganay's the minus 180 favorite. Come back on Harris is plus 155. And let's start with Harris first. So, he is primarily a grappler. His striking is serviceable, and he does seem to have a bit of power, although he does swing a little wild in there at times. That said, though, Harris doesn't really fuck around on the feet too much. He is really aggressive with his grappling, and he is pretty reliable to go to it as well. He's got good timing on the level change. His grip is really strong. He's got good technique, and when he does get the fight to the ground, he is pretty heavy on top. Will look for the ground and pound. Will hunt for submissions as well, and just overall is pretty aggressive when he gets you to the ground. Now, the concern I do have with the style is it is something that takes up a lot of energy. The guy uses a lot of big movements to get his opponents to the ground. And when the fight is there, he doesn't really just rest on top of them. Harris is pretty aggressive when it comes to the ground and pound when he's looking to pass guard or looking to advance positions. It does look like it's something that expends a lot of energy, and I just don't know how Harris is gonna look when he gets extended in some of these fights, because a lot of his fights do end inside the distance. He is getting a little bit older, so the cardio is definitely gonna be a concern for Harris here. I believe the last time he went to a decision was back in 2017 against Carl Booth, where it looked like Harris was able to grapple for 3 rounds, although it wasn't a super high-paced fight, and there was just a lot of wall and stall. But yeah, that fight was about 4 years, that fight was about 4 years ago. Although it did show that Harris can get it out, I just don't know how that's going to translate to this particular performance. But for this matchup, Harris will be going up against Kasanganay, who is a pretty solid striker, but I'd say he is a pretty well-rounded fighter in general. He's got good offensive boxing, does stay pretty defensively sound as well. And Kasanganay has also shown he can mix in the wrestling as well. That said, though, I do feel Kasanganay is still a bit green on the ground, but he is still developing there, I'd say. Because we saw in his most recent fight against Palatnikov, he was able to pull off the submission. But you do have to consider, I really don't think Palatnikov is UFC caliber. I think he's someone that really benefited from these, short notice COVID cards. I don't think Palatnikov is going to hang around in the UFC for too long. That said, though, it is still a good look. It does show that Kasanganay is adding some wrinkles to his game. Because I believe, I think it was his Contender Series fight, Kasanganay, he had his opponent down on the ground, but there were a lot of opportunities for him to advance positions, to possibly, get the submission, but he didn't really take advantage of it. Probably didn't really know what to do there, aside from just kind of staying on top of his opponent. Regardless, though, Kasanganay is still pretty young, and so I do feel there are a lot of opportunities for him to make improvements and just add different aspects to his game. But as far as this matchup goes, it is a pretty interesting matchup. I do think that we potentially have a striker versus grappler matchup here, Harris being the grappler, Kasanganay being the striker here. So, on the feet, I definitely do favor Kasanganay a little bit more. I do think his technique's a little crisper, a little tighter in there, and he's a little more technical, whereas with Harris, I do think that Harris is a little more wild in there. I believe Harris will have a bit of a size advantage, but I really do think that Harris is can swing a little wild on the feet. But I do feel his power kind of equalizes a little bit. That said, though, Harris generally is going to look to get this fight to the ground. He is going to look to get in close and either look to just wall install or look to just get you to the ground from there. And as far as the grappling goes, I do have to favor Harris a bit more than Kasanganay. And, for Kasanganay, I do believe that Harris will probably be the best grappler that Kasanganay has gone up against. I'd say Kasanganay's primarily just gone up against strikers so far, and none with even close to the level of grappling that Harris has, in my opinion. And so that's what really makes this matchup interesting, right? It's whoever's able to get their game going is probably going to have a much more success. That said, though, I do have to lean towards Harris. I do think that the skill gap between the grappling between Harris and Kasanganay is going to be a bit bigger than the skill gap in the striking between Kasanganay and Harris. And on the feet, while I do feel that Kasanganay is probably the better striker, I don't think he'll be blowing Harris out of the water. I think that, he likely will be getting the better of Harris in the exchanges, but generally I do think Harris can probably keep it close, at least until he is able to get a takedown on Kasanganay. Now, the big question that I have with Harris is whether or not he's going to be able to maintain a heavy grappling pace if he isn't able to get Kasanganay out of there in that first round and a half or two. I think that I think that Harris could definitely have a pretty dominant round and a half, maybe 2 rounds. Going into that third round, it might be a little dicey if Harris does start to slow down. That said, though, I just don't think that Kasanganay is a super dangerous striker. I don't think he's really gotten any. Well, he's definitely not gotten any knockouts in the UFC, but generally the guy is pretty much a decisionator. Honestly, he only got I think a couple of finishes on the regional scene, but all in all, Kasanganay's been more or less just a decisionator. That said, though, I do think he's got some power, just not like the one-punch knockout power. But yeah, going back to this matchup, I am going to have to slightly lean towards Harris here. I do believe that he's got a pretty clear path with the grappling, and even in a striking matchup, I do think he could keep you competitive. And combined with the wrestling, the grappling, I do think that Harris will have a bit of an edge there. And I think there's a slight chance that Harris might just be a much better grappler and could potentially get a finish here as well, because from what I've seen from Impa, he just doesn't look all that advanced in the grappling. He has shown some decent takedown defense and get-ups against the likes of Buckley, but Buckley is mainly a striker. He's got a bit of wrestling to fall back to, but by and large, Buckley is a grappler or a striker, so I don't know if that's really something you could take too much from. So I'm not banking on Kasanganay just being a complete scrub on the ground, but I do feel that there's a potential for there to be a massive gap on in the grappling for this matchup. And, as far as level of competition and experience goes, Impa does have a few more UFC wins, a few more UFC fights, but I just feel you can't put too much weight in those wins compared to some of the wins that Harris has gotten. Even though Impa has been in the UFC a little bit longer. Like, Impa's wins in the UFC are against the likes of Palatnikov and Maki Pitolo, who I feel, at least with Palatnikov, not UFC caliber, Pitolo's definitely a bit of a bust at this point. So he's fought, I'd say lower level, regional level guys, whereas with Harris, he's kind of in a similar situation, but, you can argue that Christian Aguilera is probably better than, Palatnikov and Pitolo. Definitely better than Palatnikov, arguably maybe same level as Pitolo. But yeah, I just think that as far as level of competition and just experience goes, you might actually give the advantage to Harris, even though Impa has been in the UFC a little bit longer. Anyways, I just think that all these factors combined with the grappling game of Harris should give him a bit of an edge in this fight. So I do have Harris winning here. I do have a unit on him at plus 155. I just feel that Kasanganay has been historically pretty overvalued in the UFC for someone who is still pretty green, in my opinion. While he has shown improvements in his game, I do think overall he's still a pretty basic fighter. So for me, I do have Harris here. I think he can either, pull off a decision win here or just get the submission. So, yeah, the pick here is Harris, and I am potentially looking at the sub prop for Harris as well. I do think that there is a chance there's going to be a pretty big gap here on the ground. So, for me, the pick here is Harris, and I'll take him to win by submission. Moving along, we have Sarah Alpar versus Erin Blanchfield, and Blanchfield's going to be the minus 300 favorite. Come back on Alpar is plus 250, and this is a pretty low level fight here. Alpar on the feet, she is a bit plotty. She does swing a bit wild, and will look to blitz in, throw combinations and blitz in. Overall, honestly, just a pretty low level striker. She does seem to have some pretty aggressive wrestling though, but she is kind of sloppy in there. I've actually seen her lose position a few times because she's gotten a bit overzealous on the takedowns, and I have seen her also overcommit a bit to the singles sometimes. And if she's not able to get her opponents down, she will resort to just wall and stall. And she does seem to struggle a bit when she's not able to just muscle her opponents to the ground. And we saw that happen a bit against Jessica Rose Clark, where She wasn't able to get Rose Clark down, wasn't really able to control her, and basically just got pummeled by Jessica Rose Clark. Defensively, it does look like Alpar struggles a bit off of her back as well. So, I'd say outside of Alpar's offensive grappling, I don't really think she's really all that good. And something to note is I do feel she is a bit undersized at 135. She is a little thick, if I'm being honest. She can probably make 125, but a lot of the lower level 135 fighters are just kind of bloated 125ers, and similarly with 145, it's just kind of filled with bloated 135ers. But I digress. Moving along, her opponent Blanchfield is primarily a grappler as well. Her striking isn't that great. It's definitely a work in progress. It's a little janky, but she is pretty reliable to go to the grappling. But going back to the striking real quick, I do feel that Blanchfield's probably going to be the better striker than Alpar. And, it does say that Blanchfield's got a head kick knockout on her record, but that was against Victoria Leonardo, who was basically just there to be hit that whole fight. And if I'm not mistaken, Leonardo ate like 3 or 4 head kicks prior to that one that knocked her out landing anyways. So not a performance you could really take too much from, but I do feel that Blanchfield is probably going to be the slightly better striker in this matchup, but it's probably going to be close. Both are pretty hittable. Both have pretty sloppy striking, honestly. But I do feel that Blanchfield is going to be the better grappler. She's just, like I said, much more reliable to get the fight there. And she's pretty aggressive there on the ground as well. Will generally look to advance positions, threaten submissions, and she is someone who will attack off her back as well. Which it's not a great look, especially if Alpar is able to successfully get some of the takedowns. I don't really want to see Blanchfield just stay on her back for too long looking for submissions. But that said, she is Blanchfield is I guess kind of dangerous on the ground. And we did see Blanchfield's takedown defense tested a bit against Cortez, which, that was actually a pretty close fight. And, as we all know, Tracy Cortez is in the UFC now. In fact, Blanchfield's actually got a number of fights against other fighters that have made it into the UFC as well. So I do feel Blanchfield is, she's fought the better opponents, basically. And, going back to Blanchfield, she did stuff the takedowns of Cortez moderately well, but, Cortez was eventually able to get her to the ground. And Blanchfield, she was kind of content attacking subs off her back. And, that is definitely going to be a concern in this matchup here. But I do feel Cortez is a much, much better grappler than Alpar. And, with Blanchfield overall, I just feel she's a pretty proficient grappler. She's got decent cardio. She can put on a pretty decent pace. And I think her striking is serviceable enough for her to set up her grappling. But as far as this matchup goes, like I said before, I do feel the striking is probably going to be pretty close. I might just give the slight edge to Blanchfield, but it should be pretty even, honestly. But as far as the grappling goes, though, I do favor Blanchfield a bit more. I do think that Blanchfield's defensive grappling is a bit better than Alpar's. So even if Alpar is able to take Blanchfield down, I think that Blanchfield should be able to get a sweep or reverser, assuming that Blanchfield isn't just too content, attacking submissions off her back. And if Blanchfield is able to get the takedown on Alpar, I just see Blanchfield having a lot more success on top than Alpar. So, I got to go with Blanchfield here. I do feel the striking is even, but what sets her ahead is going to be the grappling. I think that Blanchfield's the far superior grappler. As far as betting tips go, I feel minus 300 might be a little wide considering Blanchfield is making her UFC debut, but at the same time, I just don't think that Alpar is really all that good. I really don't think that Alpar will have a ton of success this fight. So, so while minus 300 does feel a little wide, I wouldn't be too opposed to, throwing Blanchfield in some parlays or something, just because I really do think that Blanchfield will have a lot of success in this fight with their grappling here. So the pick here for me is going to be Blanchfield, and I'll have her winning by decision. Moving right along, we have Montel Jackson versus JP Bays, and Jackson's going to be the minus 600 favorite. Come back on Bays is plus 400, and Bays is stepping in short notice for this fight. Jackson was initially slated to go up against Dana Baccarel, but I believe there were some visa issues with Baccarel, so Bays is stepping in short notice here. Up a weight class, so this is going to be pretty huge because Bays usually fights at 125. And, he'll be going up against a pretty solid prospect in Jackson, a very well-rounded fighter. On the feet, Jackson's a very tall, rangy fighter who actually uses his length pretty well. He's really good at pumping the jab out. Will mix in the kicks as well. He's got a pretty nasty elbow. He's got some nasty clinch knees as well. But, on the feet, he's not like a super high-level striker in my opinion. He's really just throwing a lot of single strikes in there. The issue that I do have with him on the feet is not exactly the highest volume and doesn't really put combinations together. However, he does come from a wrestling base, and he does a very good job of mixing in that wrestling. And, he's a fighter who he's not going to sell out for the wrestling. He's not going to aggressively go for it, but he does do a really good job of mixing it in to keep his opponents guessing, essentially. And, he's very strong. He's got very good technique in there. I mean, the guy's hitting 77% of the takedowns he's attempting, so that is phenomenal. So basically, if he wants to take you down, there's a good chance he will be able to get you down. Now, the only weakness that I've really seen from Jackson's game is his takedown defense. And, I do have to say that he's getting taken down by some of the best wrestlers in the division, guys like Ricky Simone and Brett Johns. And, he was fighting Simone in his debut. And, Jackson apparently is actually still pretty new to MMA, but, he still looked decent that fight. He didn't get completely dominated or anything. It was a pretty close fight, but I do think that Simone definitely won that fight. And then the other fight he kind of struggled against was Brett Johns, who is the guy's a wet blanket, right? But that was a close fight too. Johns wasn't really doing too much with the wrestling, but he did get a ton of control time in that second and third round. So really, I do think Jackson's a pretty solid prospect, with the only concern being his takedown defense and potentially his ground game as well. It does seem to struggle a bit, when he's against the cage or when he's on the ground. But outside of that, I do feel he's got a pretty well-rounded skill set and should do pretty well in this matchup here. Because like I said before, Bays is coming in short notice and up a weight class. So, Bays is going to be giving up a ton of size in this fight. And, Bays, not a particularly big flyweight either, whereas Jackson is a pretty big bantamweight as it stands. So I do feel the size is going to be a big factor here. And, I think it's going to be an even bigger factor considering Bays is primarily a wrestler. He's very aggressive in all the fights I've seen, generally looks to get the fight to the ground really quickly. He'll look to advance positions very aggressively, look for the ground and pound, hunt the submissions. The only issue with this style is he does slow down after that first round if he isn't able to get the finish. We've seen that happen a few times in some of his other fights. And in his most recent fight, he didn't even attempt a takedown, decided to keep the fight standing, and basically just got pieced up by Bruno Silva, who is, he's a decent fighter, but, nothing special, honestly. But, this is going to be a pretty rough fight for Bays, in my opinion, on the feet. He's going to be giving up a lot of length to Jackson. I do feel that Jackson should be able to keep Bays at the end of his punches, at the end of his kicks on the feet. And then on the ground, maybe Bays might be the better grappler, but, Jackson's a very solid wrestler himself. So I don't know if Bays is going to be able to get Jackson down. I don't know how much success Bays is going to have against Jackson on the ground. But, like I said before, the concern with Jackson is going to be against grapplers or, fighters who can really put on a grappling pace. I don't know if Bays is that guy either. Bays, if he's going to slow down after that first round, he's going to be in a lot of trouble against Jackson. So, yeah, I do feel this is going to be a very tough fight for Bays. I am going to have to pick Jackson here, but, I do still have a few reservations, especially with Jackson being this big of a favorite. And, time and time again, Jackson's coming in as like a big favorite against some of these guys, and he has delivered in most of those fights, but the minus 600 price tag is just really a bit steep for me at this point. I know on paper, Jackson should win this, but I just got a really weird feeling about this fight. I know Baze is probably going to come in here like super aggressive that first round. He's coming off of a pretty embarrassing loss, if I'm being honest. Completely deviated from his game plan or his usual style. So I just got a really weird feeling he's probably going to come in here guns blazing in that first round, attack that submission super aggressively. And I just have a weird feeling that if I do put Jackson in any parlays, I might be shitting myself in that first round. But man, I think on paper, I do think Jackson wins pretty comfortably. This is just such a bad matchup for Baze. Like, Baze, pretty suspect cardio, coming in short notice, up a weight class against a much bigger opponent who's a pretty solid wrestler in his own right. I do think that Jackson's got all the advantages, so I am going to take Jackson here. And, I'm really going back and forth on whether or not I want to put Jackson in some parlays. If I do, I might just put a little bit on Baze by round one, or just Baze to win in round one. I think if he really sells out for that round one, finish, he might be able to pull something out of his ass. But I do think that outside of that first round, Jackson wins pretty comfortably. I think Jackson might even be able to get the finish in the second or third round if Baze does slow down. So the pick for me is going to be Jackson. Haven't really bet him yet. Sitting at 600, it does feel a little wide, but might end up putting him in a few degenerate parlays. So again, the pick for me is Jackson, and I'll have him winning by round 2 knockout. And in the next fight, we have Dakota Bush versus Rong Zhu, and this fight is kind of at a pick 'em right now. Minus 110 both ways, although on certain books you'll have Rong Zhu being the slight favorite with the comeback on Bush being around like plus 105 or plus 110, depending on the book. But taking a look at this matchup and what each fighter does well, so I guess we'll start with Bush first. So, Bush does seem to be a pretty well-rounded fighter. His striking does seem a little wild, but he does seem to have a bit of power with how much he loads up on some of his shots. He really does have a very heavy kicking game as well. Sits down a lot on those shots. And I have seen him attack the grappling pretty aggressively. When he's on top, he'll generally look to advance positions, look for the ground and pound, look for the submission. Just overall, he seems like a decent fighter, just very, very unproven. And, I guess the same can be said about Rong Zhu. So, yeah, there was hardly any footage of him. Even when he made his UFC debut, I think I was only able to find a couple of his other fights. And, now that he's gotten one fight in the UFC, I don't think my opinion of him has changed too much. If anything, I'd say my opinion of him has kind of decreased, or at least I don't think too highly of him after that performance. I mean, Zhu got dominated pretty much pillar to post by Vargas, both in the striking and grappling department. There was a point in that fight where Zhu basically just survived Vargas's guillotine just by sheer force of will. He didn't really know how to defend that guillotine properly at all from, what I remember. And he kind of just toughed it out there, right, before Vargas eventually kind of just tired out from the guillotine and let it go. But all in all, I just don't think that Zhu is that good of a fighter. He's extremely low volume. He might have, some decent power on the regional scene, decent counter striking, but it appears that it hasn't really translated all that well to the UFC. And from the looks of it, he's primarily just crushed cans. So I don't think you could take too much from the fact that he's, 17-4. So, a ton of experience. So it seems, but a lot of these guys are, very low level in my opinion. So overall, I just feel Zhu Rong is kind of a fraud, if I'm being honest. I don't think he's all that good. I think maybe, if there's any bright spot about him is maybe his striking. He wasn't really able to showcase it all that much, but it does appear he's got a bit of power. But again, it's on the regional scene in China against some really low-level guys. His grappling defense, I think, is pretty bad. I think that, he doesn't really seem all that good on the ground. Seems a bit lost there, if I'm being honest. So yeah, I think we have like a semi-decent striker with poor defensive grappling in Rong versus Bush, who is, I'd say, a pretty well-rounded fighter who kind of excels in the grappling a bit. So as far as this matchup goes, I do have to favor Bush. I don't want to completely underrate Zhu Rong after that one bad performance. But man, he just did not look good, and even on like some of the regional tape, he never really just blew me away or anything. So, yeah, I got to go with Bush here. I just feel that maybe it's competitive on the feet. Maybe Rong is able to catch Bush. Maybe he's able to snipe him. But I do feel there's going to be a pretty significant gap in the grappling. I just think that Rong is just an absolute scrub on the ground. So I feel that if Bush is able to get this fight to the ground, he could have a lot of success there. He could probably get a ton of control time, but realistically, I can definitely see Bush getting the submission here. So the pick for me is going to be Bush, and I have him winning by submission here. I think with how just awful Zhu Rong has looked on the ground, I feel that Bush can take advantage of that. So I got Dakota Bush here. I do have a unit bet placed on him as well. I'm not going to go too crazy here because I think this is pretty low level still. But, just based off of what I've seen, I do believe Bush is the more well-rounded fighter, and I do feel that there's going to be a skill gap on the ground. So the pick here is Bush, and I got him winning by submission. Looking at the submission prop as well, it hasn't come out yet, but once it does, I might put a little bit on that. So again, the pick here is Bush, and I have Bush winning by submission. And in the next fight, we have Tony Gravely versus Nate Maness, and Gravely's the minus 175 favorite. Come back on. Maness is plus 155. And with Gravely, the guy is primarily a wrestler. His striking really isn't all that great. It's a little basic, but it really is just a means to set up his wrestling. And, as far as his wrestling goes, he's got a really great reactive takedown. He's very explosive in there as well. And once he's able to get his opponents to the ground, he does stay pretty heavy on top, and generally he does stay pretty busy. That said, though, he also is pretty composed in there. He's really good at just maintaining top control once he's got his opponents to the ground. Now, the only downside, I'd say, to his style is that he does slow down a bit in fights, especially when he has to hit multiple takedowns, in the first, second rounds. He will start to slow down a bit, and he has been able to gut it out in a lot of these fights, but I think against more dangerous strikers who do have better takedown defense, he will struggle a bit. And, as it appears, Gravely really only struggles against high-level grapplers, guys who are able to just outwork him in the grappling, or guys who are just, better in the jiu-jitsu and are able to submit him, right? Because I think like 5 out of his 6 losses are by submission, so it's probably safe to say that submissions are probably his biggest weakness. But going back to the cardio concerns of Gravely real quick, we did see him slow down a bit in his fight against Geraldo de Freitas in his most recent matchup. Or no, that was actually a couple of fights ago. But we did see Gravely slow down a bit against de Freitas, but he was able to push through it. De Freitas was starting to tee off on Gravely a bit, but Gravely was able to stay safe, hit that takedown late, and kind of just ride out that round. But that definitely is a concern going forward. I don't know how big of a concern it is in this fight. Nate Maness, while he is a pretty decent striker, I don't think he's like a killer or anything on the feet, and I don't think that Maness has got great defensive grappling. He does seem to have decent takedown defense, but if you are able to get him down, he does struggle a bit off of his back. And on the feet, I don't think he's like an elite striker or anything. I don't think he's got crazy power or anything. He does seem to have a bit of timing, does have a few knockout wins on the regional scene. But even in a lot of these regional fights, he's getting outstruck. And, he's got a number of fights where he's actually been able to hit a comeback. He's, getting hurt early in the fight and is able to kind of weather the storm a bit and then come back. That I believe that happened in the Luke Sanders fight. And then I think it also happened a bit in the Jesse Arnett fight, but I don't remember 100%. Anyways, I just feel that Maness is he's a decent striker, but, he is pretty one-dimensional, and I just don't think his striking is going to be at that level that he's going to just completely blow Gravely out of the water here. Even if Gravely is tired, I don't think Maness is going to be able to get Gravely out of there. But yeah, taking a look at this matchup, I just feel that the wrestling advantage for Gravely is just going to be way too big here. I think Gravely is going to be able to hit the takedowns. I think he's going to get a significant amount of control time. We saw Johnny Munoz get a ton of control time against Maness in that first round. And, to Munoz's credit, Munoz is a high-level, black belt. But, he's not a great wrestler or anything. So I do feel Gravely's going to have an easier time getting him to the ground. I don't know if he'll have as much success controlling Maness there like Munoz did. But, Gravely, he is pretty heavy on top, and he is pretty proficient on the ground. And if Maness is somehow able to work his way up back to his feet, I do see Gravely just chaining takedowns together. I don't think this fight is going to be, too much. I don't think there's going to be too much standing in this fight. And going back to that Johnny Munoz fight for Maness, that was a Munoz that was coming in short notice. Had a ton of success in that first round, and then Munoz basically had to resort to just wall installing the remainder of the fight. And if I'm being honest, I do feel Munoz probably won that fight, but I guess the judges kind of scored the striking that Maness did in the second and third round a little more than the wall install that Munoz pulled off. So, that was a close fight, but I don't see Gravely just looking to wall install. I think if Munoz is having that much success holding Maness up against the cage like that, I definitely think Gravely could do the same. If not, straight up just get a takedown on him. So I'm going to pick Gravely here. I just think that the wrestling is really going to get it done for him. Obviously, the concern is the cardio of Gravely. If he's going to be able to maintain that wrestling pace up until the third round so that he could stay safe and avoid just taking too much damage in that third round. But ultimately, I am going to side with Gravely here. I might actually put a little bit on Gravely. I mean, at minus 175, I think is got maybe a little bit more value. I just don't think that Maness is going to have too much success. He might have a bit of success on the feet, but I really don't think the fight is going to be standing for all that long. So the pick here is going to be Gravely for me, and I'll have him winning by decision. Moving along, we have Pannie Kianzad versus Raquel Pennington, and Pennington's the minus 135 favorite. Come back on Kianzad is plus 115. And let's start with Kianzad first. So, she is primarily a striker, will look to move forward and throw volume. She's got decent counterpunching as well, and have seen her look to work in the clinch a little bit also, but not too much. I've just seen that kind of sprinkled in there once in a while, but primarily she is looking to just throw down. Overall, I'd say she's a decent fighter. Not really sure where her ceiling is yet, though, but she is still very early in her career. Honestly, not too much else to add for Kianzad. I think she's a decent mid-level fighter. A little unproven still hasn't really fought and beaten anyone of note. But her opponent, Pennington, I'd say at this point in her career is, I'd consider her a vet. She's fought some of the best fighters in the division and has been around in the division for quite a while. So with Pennington, I do think she's primarily a striker as well. On the feet, I think that she does a little bit of a better job mixing it up, as opposed to Kianzad. She will use her kicks a little bit better, and as far as the striking goes, she's a little more diverse there also. And Pennington is also someone who will occasionally mix in the wrestling a bit too. She's not like a super high level wrestler or anything, but it is something that she can go to. Now, as far as this matchup goes, it's I think going to be pretty close. I don't think either fighter is technically much better in terms of striking. So it's going to be a pretty back and forth sort of fight, I think. So it's going to be tough to really call, because it's possibly one of those fights that are going to be a bit of a toss-up. Both are going to land some shots. Both are going to move forward. So yeah, it's going to be a little tough. But if I had to pick a side here, I am going to go with Pennington, just because I feel she's a little more well-rounded. She's someone who can mix in the wrestling a bit. And if she's able to do that, she could definitely use that to score a little better on the scorecards. As far as the striking goes, I think maybe she can mix it up a little bit more. I do think that Pennington has the slightly heavier hands, maybe by a small margin, but I do see her maybe landing the heavier shots on the feet. So that combined with the fact that, she's a little bit more well-rounded, I'm going to have to side with Pennington. I think she edges out a very close decision here, but, not super confident in this fight. This is a mid-level women's fight, so, this is going to be a very back and forth. It's going to be tough to call. You can't really feel too confident about either side. But one thing I did want to add, I guess, is just the experience and just the level of competition edge for Pennington here. She's fought just way better opponents and has been in the UFC for way longer. I mean, the only fighters that Pennington has lost to are some of like the A-tier top 5 fighters, right? So Holly Holm, perennial title challenger, which isn't really saying much at this division, but she is someone who's, I'd say, at the top of the division. Germaine Durandamy, top of the division. Amanda Nunes, the champ, obviously. Obviously, there's going to be a massive like gap between Amanda Nunes and the rest of the division. But as far as, like the A tier of the division goes, I'd say Germaine Durandamy and Holly Holm are definitely there. And then Jessica Andrade as well. So all these fighters that Pennington's losing to, I'd say, are like right at the top. So yeah, definitely give the experience advantage to Pennington. But you could also argue that maybe her career trajectory is on a downward trend, even if it's not like very apparent or if it's not on a steep downward trend. But, I do think that her best days are likely behind her. But, I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue here. Whereas with Kianzad, she's still on an upswing in her career. So just a couple factors there. But ultimately, I will side with Pennington here. I do think she's a well-rounded enough fighter and an experienced enough fighter to pull off the victory here. So the pick is Pennington, and I have her winning by decision. In the next fight, we have Tafon Nchukwi versus Mike Rodriguez, and this fight is at a pick'em right now, -110 both ways. Starting with Rodriguez first, so he is primarily a striker. He's very tall, lanky in there. He's got usually the size advantage on a lot of his opponents. He is someone I feel does use his size moderately well. He will work the jab occasionally, mixes in the kicks pretty well also, and does seem to have some pretty decent timing on his knees. Will throw those knees in the clinch as well. Now, the big issue with Rodriguez is I feel he's got very bad defensive grappling. His takedown defense is not good at all, and he's pretty bad off his back or just when he's on the ground in general. And I definitely do feel that Rodriguez is a bit of a choker. He is someone, who could be winning the first round and a half, 2 rounds, and then just completely choke the fight away. And this is kind of predicated on his 2 most recent losses, both via submission, one against Danilo Marquez and one against Ed Herman. Okay, anyways, the Marquez fight, you could argue he's, you can give him a bit of an excuse on. Marquez is a black belt, I believe, but, I don't think Marquez is a phenomenal wrestler or anything, or even like an elite jiu-jitsu guy. I think he's just your run-of-the-mill like black belt. But, I just don't think Marquez is all that great of a grappler, but he was able to get Rodriguez out of there pretty effortlessly once he was able to get the fight to the ground. And then I think the Herman one was pretty bad. You could argue that Rodriguez should have won that fight by knockout, but that fight was honestly as much as the ref screwing up as it was Rodriguez choking, because that was a fight I feel that Rodriguez could very easily have won. Even if, he didn't get that TKO, I think that had he have just, fought a little smarter in that 3rd round, he could have just coasted to a decision win. But he gets taken down by Herman. And I think Rodriguez actually re-engages in the grappling with Herman as opposed to just getting the fight back up to the feet. But essentially what happens there is Herman is able to get the fight to the ground and is able to lock up a Kimura against Rodriguez, which, that's not a great look, honestly. So yeah, I feel that if you've got decent jiu-jitsu and you're able to get on top of Rodriguez, there's a good chance you could probably just find the submission. So that aside, I do also feel that Rodriguez has got pretty suspect cardio as well. In a lot of his fights, I just see him suck and win pretty hard after that first round. And, that I think kind of explains why he might just be dropping these fights. I feel that maybe as the fight progresses, he's starting to slow down. He's going to get a little easier to take down. And then, once you get him down to the ground, he's not really proficient there. And then on top of the fact that, he's starting to slow down, he's tiring out, he's probably just going to look for a way out. Anyways, he'll be going up against Tafon Nchukwi, who I believe is primarily a striker as well. And Nchukwi is going to be the smaller fighter in there, but the guy is still absolutely jacked. He's definitely, I think, going to be the thicker fighter. Now, with that said, though, I do feel that Nchukwi is only like a 7 or an 8 on the brick shithouse scale. Like, the guy's jacked, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think he's on the level of guys like Blanchfield or even the guy from last week, Dalcha Lungimbula. Anyways, I think the point I was trying to make here was that even though Nchukwi's, he's a bigger, more muscular fighter, he definitely has, or at least it seems like he's got better cardio than those other guys that I mentioned, right? Because Nchukwi, he's got pretty heavy hands, and he does actually sit down quite a bit on a lot of his shots. He actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Joaquin Buckley, who's also on this card as well, one of these guys who's able to fight at a pretty high pace considering how well-muscled he is and how much he puts on his shots. A lot of the times you see these guys with heavier hands, they're not able to sustain that sort of pace for 2 or 3 rounds. Usually they're just tired after that first round. But guys like Nchukwi, they're able to maintain that pace for the duration of the fight. Now, with that said, though, I do still think that Nchukwi's still a little bit unproven. My comment about him being able to sustain like that pace for 3 rounds was against Jamie Pickett, who was really low volume that fight, was getting back down a lot. And so, I don't think that Nchukwi was really getting pushed that fight. And so while I do believe Nchukwi's cardio checks out, I might just be overrating that specific performance against him because in his other fights, he's primarily just gotten first or second round finishes. Similarly, though, I don't think that Rodriguez really has a signature win in the UFC either. So both guys, I'd say, pretty much on the same level in terms of level of competition. Maybe you'd give Rodriguez the experience advantage a little bit more. He has been in there a number of times, whereas Nchukwi's only been in the octagon 6 times and only has had 2 UFC fights. Anyways, taking a look at this matchup, I do think it's going to be pretty close, and it is tough to call just because there's going to be a lot of variables from both sides. So I do feel this will be primarily a stand-up match. But yeah, on the feet, Rodriguez definitely will have the size advantage. I think that the jab is going to be Rodriguez's best friend here. I think the kicks that Rodriguez uses is going to be helpful too. I expect Nchukwi to be the one moving forward, be the one pressuring, and then I see Rodriguez likely just looking to maintain distance, really just look to work the jabs and the kicks, and then Nchukwi maybe looking to crash the distance, put some combinations together to make Rodriguez as uncomfortable as possible. But yeah, this is a pretty tough fight to call. Just both guys, a lot of question marks around both guys, but if I had to make a pick, based off of what I've seen, I am going to lean towards Rodriguez. I think that on the feet, I really think the size and the length is going to put Rodriguez over the top here. We saw Nchukwi really struggle with the jab and the movement of Jun Young Park in his most recent fight. I don't think Rodriguez has got phenomenal footwork or anything, but I think if he's able to stay on the outside and really work the jab against Nchukwi, he could probably give Nchukwi a lot of trouble. That said, though, I think that maybe if Nchukwi is doing a good job of cutting off the cages, doing a good job of pressuring Rodriguez, making this fight dirty, I can definitely see Nchukwi potentially landing the harder shots. But Just overall in this fight, I think Rodriguez will likely be able to maintain distance and just outpoint Nchukwi. That said, though, Rodriguez is just a super unreliable fighter. And even though I have him winning, I don't think I'll be betting on him just because Rodriguez is liable to just lose the fight just because the guy's cardio is a little suspect. He could just be winning that first round and then drop the last 2 rounds because the pressure of Nchukwi might be a little much. But yeah, this is a tough fight to call. I am going to side with Rodriguez here, but pretty low confidence. I'll pick Rodriguez to win by decision, but extremely, extremely low confidence. And moving along, we have Joaquin Buckley versus Antônio Arroyo, and Buckley's going to be the minus 205 favorite. Come back on. Arroyo is plus 175. And I guess we'll start with the Arroyo first. And, if I'm being honest, I'm just not really sure what this guy is particularly good at. I suspect he might have like a grappling base, but I'm not completely sure. As far as his striking goes, I don't think it's that great. He's got a pretty heavy leg kick. But outside of that, he hasn't really shown too much on the feet that I like. As far as his takedown defense goes, it's not great as well. And, you do have to look at the opponents. He got taken down multiple times by Deron Wynn, who is a good wrestler in his own right. But, he was giving up so much size in that fight. Like, that fight just looked ridiculous. I think Arroyo had, like, a good, foot or more on Wynn. But Wynn was able to repeatedly take Arroyo down and basically just win on the basis of just getting a ton of takedowns because he wasn't really doing much damage in that fight. And then in some of his other fights against like Muniz and Regman, those guys were able to take Arroyo down as well. Granted, Muniz is a fantastic grappler in his own right, and Regman I don't know too much about, but I feel that's just not a great look. Muniz was able, Arroyo was able to pull off the arm triangle on Regman, but I just feel that Regman's probably not even close to UFC caliber, so he was able to pull that off. That said, though, I'm just not high on Arroyo whatsoever. I just don't think the guy brings too much to the table, and so far he's looked like pretty bad, honestly. Like, he's a pretty limited striker. He doesn't really have much on the feet to offer. And then on the ground, he seems like maybe he's a guard player. So he's just not someone who I think is going to win a ton of minutes. He might pull off like a crazy knockout or a submission. But, by and large, I just don't think that he's going to be a good minute winner in the UFC. And, I just don't think his cardio is particularly great as well. And he'll be going up against Buckley, who is primarily a striker. And Buckley, the guy's a fucking cannon in there. He just explodes into his punches. He'll look to put combinations together, rip to the body. Just has really heavy hands in general. And, like I mentioned before, he's really good at putting together combinations. And, the crazy thing is he is able to put on a pretty consistent pace considering how much he puts into each shot. It's definitely impressive that he's able to go at least, I'd say, 2 rounds pushing that sort of pace. Supposedly, he's one of these guys that doesn't really cut much, which kind of makes sense. I do feel that fighters who don't have to cut a ton of weight, who are fighting at more or less their natural weight class, are able to fight at a slightly higher pace. I think their cardio generally is a little better. Obviously, this isn't a blanket statement or anything. I just feel like in general they're a little better off cardio-wise. Anyways, going back to Buckley here, he's a pretty solid striker on the feet. As far as his defensive grappling goes, it just doesn't look all that good. I think the last fight that I saw his takedown defense and defensive grappling being tested was against Logan Storley, who pretty much just dominated Buckley. That said, though, Storley is a pretty legit wrestler. So yeah, that is a little concerning from Buckley's end, although I really don't think Arroyo's going to be chaining takedowns together against Buckley here. But, if he is somehow able to get Buckley to the ground, Arroyo might be able to control him a bit there, possibly find the submission. But, outside of that, I haven't really seen too much from Buckley. But, taking a look at this matchup, I do have to favor Buckley quite a bit more on the feet. I think that with his aggressive style, how he likes to move forward, how he likes to pressure, it's going to give Arroyo a lot of trouble. I think that Arroyo generally needs space to get his kicks going, and if Buckley is able to pressure him, is able to get into his face, Arroyo is going to have a hard time getting off on his shots. Not to mention, Buckley is going to be landing some nasty shots on Arroyo, and I can definitely see Buckley putting Arroyo out, or at least hurting him pretty badly. If the fight stays standing, I do think that Buckley's going to win a pretty dominant decision, or potentially get the finish. I think Arroyo's best shot at this fight is probably to get the fight to the ground. But that said, though, Arroyo does have some pretty nasty kicks. He could definitely get off on a few of those leg kicks, could definitely chop at the legs of Buckley. But with how telegraphed some of Arroyo's kicks are, and how much he loads up on them, I do think they're a little obvious. And if Buckley is able to make the read on that, he could definitely counter Arroyo. Arroyo does throw a lot of naked leg kicks, and against quicker fighters, I do think they could catch Arroyo. So where it stands now, I do agree that Buckley should be this big of a favorite. The only question mark is going to be the defensive grappling of Buckley. If somehow this fight ends up on the ground and he's, stuck there for 3 or 4 minutes, I wouldn't be completely surprised, but I'm leaning more towards Buckley being able to keep the fight standing and just being able to hurt Arroyo on the feet. So I have Buckley winning here, and I think he could win a decision here or get the knockout. I'll lean more towards the knockout. I think he gets it done maybe in the second or third round. So the pick here for me is Buckley, and I do have him winning by knockout. In this matchup, we have Arman Tsarukyan versus Christos Giagos, and Tsarukyan's the minus 700 favorite, and the comeback on Giagos is plus 450. And this is going to be a pretty interesting matchup here. We have a grappler versus grappler, essentially, and Tsarukyan, he is a really highly touted prospect. But starting with Giagos first, like I mentioned before, he is a grappler. But as far as his striking goes, he does actually move pretty well on the feet. He's got decent counter striking as well. So on the feet, he is still a very serviceable striker. But he is primarily a wrestler. He's much more comfortable there. But, if the fight does play out, on the feet, he's not completely lost there. As far as his grappling goes, his takedowns are pretty explosive, and once he's on top, he's pretty heavy there. The only issue with Giagos, though, is he does slow down in fights, and, against higher level guys, higher level grapplers, they have been able to find the submission, when Giagos starts to tire. But with that said, these guys that have been doing it against him are the likes of Charles Oliveira and Gilbert Burns, two very high level grapplers, so not going to hold that against Giagos too much. But I think it's safe to say that Giagos definitely does start to tire as the fight goes on. Now, he's going to be going up against Arman Tsarukyan, who is a very promising prospect, to say the least. Very well-rounded fighter. Striking, like Giagos, is decent. It's serviceable. But, again, he is much more comfortable with this grappling. As far as the grappling goes for Tsarukyan, though, he does have decent timing on his single and stuff, but he is really good at using his weight to just drag opponents to the ground. Just really good at putting his weight on his opponent and making them bear his weight, essentially. Tsarukyan is also pretty heavy on top as well, and is actually pretty good in the scrambles also. Now, one thing I will say about Tsarukyan is sometimes his entries are a bit telegraphed, and he's going to have to watch out for those knees up the middle. And, in his fight against OAM, I believe he actually did eat a few clean knees, but, he was able to still convert those takedowns. But going forward, that definitely is something he'll need to shore up a bit. He'll have to set up his takedowns a little bit better because, as it stands, he gets a little predictable with some of his entries. I'm not sure if Giagos is going to be able to take advantage of this, but that is definitely something that can be exploited going forward. But going back to Tsarukyan real quick, Giagos has been in the UFC a little bit longer. However, I kind of like the matchups that Tsarukyan's been given so far. He's fought some really high-level grapplers in his UFC run. So obviously he made his debut against Islam Makhachev and, was actually pretty competitive there. He put up a great fight considering it was his UFC debut against Makhachev, who is a top 10 guy in my opinion. And then he also gets matched up with OAM and Davi Ramos, who are the two guys that are really high-level grapplers also. So Tsarukyan's definitely shown he can hang with some really high-level guys on the ground. And, with Giagos, I don't see it being any different. In fact, I'd say Giagos is a step down in competition compared to some of the wrestlers and grapplers that Tsarukyan has fought. So I completely see why the line is as juiced as it is. This just looks like a very favorable matchup for Tsarukyan all around. I just feel that, it is a little wide, but, I can definitely understand it. I think that Tsarukyan is going to be just a better version of Giagos, essentially. They more or less do the same thing. You can argue that maybe Giagos' striking is a little better, but I don't think it's to the point he's just going to completely wipe Tsarukyan out on the feet. But yeah, as far as the grappling goes, I do favor Tsarukyan a little bit more. I think that, his cardio is definitely a bit better. And, this could just be a fight where I could see Tsarukyan just spamming takedowns. And even if he's not getting a ton of control time over Giagos, he's going to win just on the basis of just having a higher work rate. And, this fight kind of reminds me a little bit of the Dvalishvili versus Stamen fight, where we have two wrestlers going at it, and what really set Merab apart was his cardio, the fact that he was able to just consistently shoot and consistently get his opponent down, was able to win him the fight. And while Stamen is a pretty good wrestler in his own right, he wasn't able to stuff the takedowns of Merab, and he wasn't able to get his own wrestling game going as well. And I could definitely see that happening in this fight also, because with Giagos, like I said before, his cardio is a little suspect. And against someone like Tsarukyan, who will push a pretty high grappling pace, I do see Giagos slowing down. And I don't know if Tsarukyan is going to be able to get Giagos out of there, but I do feel that Tsarukyan's going to have a lot of success working his offensive grappling. And, I just don't see Giagos, keeping this fight standing long enough to either win in the striking or, have enough in the tank to get his grappling game going as well. So I do have Tsarukyan winning this. I think he wins a pretty dominant decision. But like I said before, I do feel the line is a little wide. Even though I do feel this is a very favorable matchup for him. We've seen Tsarukyan beat better grapplers before, or at least, put up a really good fight against better grapplers. So it's just hard to see Giagos losing or Giagos winning this. But I guess to play devil's advocate, this is probably going to be a very high-paced, grappling matchup, maybe a lot of scrambling, a lot of just back and forth on the ground. And, if there's not too much going on, if there's a lot of just positional changes and stuff, maybe the refs or the judges don't fully understand what's going on and it becomes a much closer fight than it should be, we might see a very hairy sort of decision. But, I don't think that's too likely. I think more often than not, we just see Tsarukyan just put on a pace against Giagos here and just win a very comfortable decision. So the pick here is Tsarukyan, and I do have him winning by decision. And in the next fight, we have Mandy Bohm versus Ariane Lipski, and this fight is a pick'em right now, -110 both ways. So starting with Lipski first, she is primarily a striker, does seem to have a pretty diverse striking attack. Pretty bad defensively, though, is pretty hittable. But I think the worst thing, obviously, with her is that she's got absolutely dog shit takedown defense, zero ground game whatsoever. She just looks completely lost on the ground. And I think she's been taken down in pretty much all of her fights, except for the Luana Carolina fight where, that was just the flukiest knee bar ever. But yeah, just on the ground, Lipski just looks completely helpless there. If I remember correctly, I believe I did take De La Rosa over Lipski in her most recent fight. And I did take De La Rosa to win inside the distance as well, just because I feel that Lipski's, ground game is just such a massive liability that someone like De La Rosa, who is a grappler, would be able to fully take advantage. But as far as this fight goes, the first thing I looked for when doing tape on Bohm was, if she's got any sort of grappling game at all. And, from what I have seen, it just does not look good. On the feet, Bohm has got very slow, loopy sort of punches. And, I have seen her work in the clinch a bit. And, in some of the fights that she's in, I've seen her somehow get on top of her opponents, but I don't think she's got particularly great wrestling. I think on a lot of these exchanges, she's kind of able to just get a trip on her opponents and, is somehow able to just fall into their guard. But, overall, I wouldn't say Bohm is a grappler or even a wrestler by any means. He just seems like someone who's maybe just more of an opportunistic grappler. I haven't really seen her look to proactively wrestle. It's just one of these things that just happens for her in these fights. And I would like to see a little more, grappling offense from her before taking a shot on her, especially since, she is making her UFC debut and just overall just has not looked good whatsoever on tape. I feel that the UFC is really wanting Lipski to get a win here, but I just don't know if that's going to happen. But at the same time, I don't know if I really want to pick Bohm here just because she just looks so bad. So if I'm really forced to make a pick here, I think I might just go with Lipski because I feel that on the feet, Lipski is the much better striker. I think she's a lot quicker, a lot sharper in there. But the big thing really is just the horrible defensive grappling. I mean, that's just such a big liability. Even if Bohm isn't a real aggressive grappler, if the fight somehow ends up on the ground, Lipski will have likely lost that round. And again, even though Bohm isn't a very active wrestler or grappler, this is MMA, and if Lipski's throwing a kick and she slips, or if Bohm is somehow able to clinch her up against the fence and get a trip along there and get on top of Lipski, these are all things that could potentially happen. And if it does happen, then Lipski's kind of screwed. Look, I am going to pick Lipski here to win just because I feel that if the fight is just a striking match, I do favor her a bit more. However, as far as just betting tips go, I don't really recommend betting Lipski unless you're getting decent plus money on her just because of how big of a liability her takedown defense is. I think you'd need a bigger payout on Lipski if you're going to put money on her. But that's just my opinion. I am going to still pick Lipski to win. I'll pick her to win by decision, but I don't think I'll be betting her at all. And moving along, we have Ion Cutelaba versus Devin Clark. And this should be a pretty fun one. We have a grappler versus grappler matchup. But Cutelaba is going to be the minus 135 favorite. Comeback on Clark is plus 115. And so with Cutelaba, the guy, while he does have a wrestling base, is kind of known for his explosive striking and his knockout power. But yeah, he does come from that wrestling background. But anyways, on the feet, he's got just absolute dynamite in his hands. Not the best technique or anything, but it's not going to matter too much because he does have that equalizer in his hands. However, we did see him go back to the wrestling in his most recent fight against Dustin Jacoby, I believe, and he showed some pretty explosive takedowns. The top control wasn't great there, but he was able to go to the wrestling pretty well in that fight, considering I don't think he's got the best cardio. He was able to gut it out. But yeah, Cutelaba's just got a style that's just not very conducive to going the distance with how explosive his wrestling and his striking is, right? On the feet, he's going to be winging bombs in there. It's going to take up a lot of energy. His takedowns, he's very explosive with them as well. He'll pick opponents up and just slam him onto the ground. So yeah, not very conservative with his energy. I feel that if Cutelaba maybe, paces himself a little better, he could fight these 3-round fights a little bit better. But, with just his energy expenditure, I just don't think that he's going to be in the fight for much longer than a round and a half or so. That said, though, he did put up a hell of a performance against Jacoby. He showed a lot of toughness and heart in that fight. Was able to gut it out much, much better than I expected, right? I thought that Cutelaba would probably just gas and then probably die in the second or third rounds. But, he hung in there and actually I think went to the wrestling a bit in that third round as well. That fight ended up being a draw, which, it was pretty crazy, honestly. I believe Cutelaba definitely did win that first round 10-8. And then that second and third round was actually pretty close. He could have potentially stolen either one of those rounds. had he maybe just gotten a little more control time. But in any case, I do feel that was a level up fight there for Cutelaba. And, I don't think we should really be that surprised because Cutelaba is only 27, which is crazy to think about. The guy's been in the UFC for quite a while. He looks old as fuck in there, but he's only 27. And, I think I may have mentioned it in the podcast for Cutelaba's most recent fight a few months ago. I did say that Cutelaba's pretty young still. He could still be making improvements in his game. And that was a fight where he, it was really impressive, honestly. So, yeah, ultimately, I just feel that Cutelaba's still at that age where, he could be making improvements from fight to fight. And it kind of showed in his last fight. And he'll be going up against Devin Clark, who is another guy who's actually been in the UFC for quite a while and is still relatively young, right? So Devin Clark, I think he's had like 9 or 10 fights in the UFC already. Still only 31 though. But with Clark, he is primarily a wrestler as well. And unlike Cutelaba, I feel that Clark is much more reliant to go to his wrestling, whereas with Cutelaba, I mean, the guy's content to just stand and bang with you. Anyways, Clark, he will generally look to wrestle with his opponents. His striking is serviceable, but usually he's just looking to close the distance, get in on his opponent's hips, look to chain takedowns together. The guy's just a pretty solid wrestler in my opinion. Clark is someone that can definitely make a fight really grindy. I don't think he's super dangerous on the top or anything. He'll just mainly look for control, a little bit of ground and pound, but historically he hasn't really been a finisher. He's someone who will maybe just look to ride his opponents out and just grind his way to a victory. And, he's someone who's definitely got the cardio to do so. He can go 3 pretty hard rounds with the wrestling. And, while he doesn't have a lot of finishing upside, he is someone who's generally good at just staying safe and winning a very comfortable point-based decision here. And, that's what's making this fight such an interesting matchup, because we have 2 guys who are wrestlers essentially. But in my opinion, I think Cutelaba is the way more dangerous striker on the feet. And he's definitely got way more finishing upside when the fight is standing. And with that in mind, I do expect Clark to look to get takedowns on Cutelaba, just because I feel that even though Cutelaba does have decent takedown defense, we haven't really seen him spend too much time off his back. But I do have to believe that Cutelaba's probably got serviceable defensive grappling, just because at least in his fight against Antogulov, where I know Antogulov's a bit of a meme at this point, but the guy is still a pretty solid submission grappler, and Cutelaba defended against Antogulov pretty well and was able to knock out Antogulov once he got the fight back to the feet. And I feel that similarly in this matchup, if Cutelaba is able to keep it standing, he could potentially get the knockout on Clark. I don't know if he's going to have a lot of success with the wrestling against Clark, seeing as how Clark has got pretty decent takedown defense, and he's a wrestler in his own right. So yeah, this is going to be a pretty interesting, a pretty close matchup. I am going to slightly lean towards Cutelaba. I think the knockout upside is definitely there, but I can also see Clark looking to just get his wrestling going and really just grind on Cutelaba. And especially since I feel Cutelaba's cardio is not that great, I can definitely see Clark having, a successful round 2, round 3, just, getting a bit of control time on Cutelaba, especially if Cutelaba starts to slow down. That said, though, I am ultimately going to have to side with Cutelaba here. I think that the knockout upside is going to be there, and even if he's not knocking Clark out, he's going to have the much bigger action moments. He's going to be landing some pretty heavy shots in there, even if Clark doesn't go down. I mean, I think the big question for Cutelaba is if he's going to be able to withstand the wrestling pressure of Clark, and if he's going to be able to keep this fight standing long enough, or at least get his own offensive wrestling going to the point that he could either get the finish or potentially get the decision here. So I'm going to lean towards Cutelaba being able to do so. So, the pick here is going to be Cutelaba, but I don't think I'll be betting him. It's going to be hard to bet someone who's a known gasser at this point. So the pick here is Kudalaba.
And in the main event, we have
no
Ryan Spann versus Anthony Smith. And Smith is the minus 168 favorite. Comeback on Spann is plus 148. So, not the best main event, but I do have a feeling this will be a pretty exciting fight potentially. And I do think this fight will probably end inside the distance. But taking a look at these guys, so with Spann, I do feel he's a pretty well-rounded fighter. I know a lot of people probably won't agree with that. They'll probably just call him a pretty one-dimensional striker, which, I do feel there's a little bit of truth to that. He's got a lot of power. He's got very explosive striking, but Spann is someone who could definitely grapple a little bit, and, he's not shy about going there once in a while. He's got decent wrestling. He's got decent jiu-jitsu. Nothing crazy there, but, I do feel he's a little reliant on getting the finish overall. So, yeah, he's definitely got stopping power on the feet and on the ground. He does have a number of submission wins. I don't think the guy's a submission specialist or anything, but, he does have a pretty sneaky guillotine. So, yeah, I do feel that Spann is a bit dangerous anywhere the fight is. And, if I'm being honest, I do feel that Spann is a little underrated. With that said, though, I do believe Spann is pretty inconsistent as well. And I suspect that's partly because of his subpar cardio. He definitely slows down in fights. And, if he's not getting the finish, it's going to be a pretty close fight. Only 2 of his fights have gone to a decision in the UFC, and both of those fights were pretty close. And the fact that one of those fights was against Sam Alvey in 2020 is just not a good look. Now, with all that in mind, I do feel generally it's pretty hard to look good against Spann unless you're knocking him out, which, Walker was able to do, and then Roberson was able to do like a few years back. But by and large, it's just kind of hard to look good against Spann. And in this fight, Spann will be going up against Anthony Smith, who is a veteran of the sport at this point. Smith is only 33 years old, but he's got a ton of fights in the UFC. Wasn't around during the Strikeforce days, so he's been around for sure. And while he isn't super old, I do feel he's got a decent amount of fight miles, and he for sure has taken a fuck ton of damage. But yeah, he's a very well-rounded fighter at this point. He's got very solid striking, and we actually did see him kind of tee off against Glover a few fights ago. Early in that fight was looking really good until he just kind of gassed out. He's also got a pretty nasty calf kick that he's kind of developed lately, and he was able to get a finish off of those calf kicks against Crute in his most recent fight. Smith was able to just completely shut down the leg of Crute, and by the end of that first round, Crute's leg was a fucking noodle in there, and he wasn't able to put any weight on it afterwards. So I believe the doctor had to call that one off, and it's solid victory for Smith there. Not sure how often he can keep pulling that off, but if you look at his fight before that, or the second fight before that, he was actually getting off on some of those calf kicks against Rakic as well. I think that's something that may have escaped some people's memory, because Rakic ended up dominating that fight. But, early in that fight, Smith was landing some pretty nasty calf kicks. However, Rakic was landing some of his own nasty calf kicks as well, was able to, I think, knock Smith down with some of those kicks. And then I think from then on was able to just pretty much dominate Smith in the grappling. And that's just not a great look, in my opinion. Rakic, not really a grappler, was able to just control Smith for 3 rounds. And Smith, he is a high-level black belt, and, he is very competent on the ground, but, he definitely is a little too comfortable off his back sometimes, and that'll lead to him just throwing rounds away when he's on his back. And, once in a while, he will be able to pull a submission off his back against a noob like Clark, but generally, I just don't think that's going to give him too much success. And, just seeing Rakic just lay on top of Smith for like a good 10, 12 minutes is just extremely concerning, considering Rakic isn't really like a grappler. And, if Rakic is able to pull that off, I can see Spann possibly having a bit of success there. And, even though Spann isn't like an elite grappler or anything, he can definitely mix in some takedowns and look to secure some control time and definitely win minutes just by laying on top of Smith. And I actually went and did a bit of digging on Spann, and I'm not sure how up to date this information is, but supposedly Spann's only a blue belt, which is a little concerning coming into this matchup. If he's going to look to grapple potentially, Smith could very well just find that submission off his back if Spann's not careful there. So while the wrestling could be a path to victory for Spann, it could also leave some openings for Smith to get that submission. Now, as far as the striking goes, it's not something I honestly have the greatest read on. I do feel both guys are probably similar. I might give the edge to Smith, but I'd probably give the finishing upside to Spann. But ultimately, I do feel the striking exchanges are going to be pretty close. I can see Smith possibly getting off on some of those kicks, but if he's not setting any of those up, if he's kind of just spamming it, I do see Spann potentially looking to counter him. And Spann does have a lot of power. But yeah, this fight is actually pretty tough for me to call. I feel there are a decent amount of win conditions for both guys. I think that Smith, he is extremely battle tested, but he does have a lot of experience in there. I think Spann, he's got a lot of finishing upside, but again, his cardio isn't that great. Man, if I had to pick a side though, I think I am gonna go with Smith here. I'm gonna go with the more experienced fighter, the guy who's a little more well-rounded in my opinion, and the fighter that probably has a slightly better cardio. So I'm gonna take Smith here. I don't know if I'm going to bet him. I do feel the line is a little wide. I think that Spann generally fights pretty competitively, and I don't think Smith is really blowing anyone out of the water at this point in his career. So yeah, I am going to pick Spann here, but I do feel the value is probably with Spann, and if anything, I might just put a little bit on Spann inside the distance. I think that he can definitely get the knockout. He might be able to get the submission if he catches Smith in like a guillotine or something, or if he's able to hurt Smith and, get his neck or something. So the pick for me is Smith, but I do feel all the value is on Spann here. And that will do it for this episode. Shout out to anyone who's stuck around this long. I know it's been a pretty rough few weeks here and, just not a great year in general for me. But I am going to keep things 100% transparent here. And hopefully we could bounce back and end the year off strong. There's always going to be some ups and downs in this game. And hopefully you guys are having a better go of it. But I am going to keep grinding, keep putting out content here. And, this podcast I actually did record a bit earlier in the week. I'm out of town this weekend, so yeah, I got everything wrapped up early, so I do apologize if any of the fights do fall off or, get rebooked or something, but, I'll go ahead and maybe I'll post a written breakdown in the comments or something if that happens. But anyways, I appreciate you guys for listening, and I'll catch you next week for the UFC 266 card. Peace.